Have you ever felt like you were invisible? Like the world had already decided what you were capable of? And it wasn't much. This is the story of a man who lived in that shadow. A man whose face no one remembered, whose voice no one cared to hear. A man who was told, to his face, that he would never make it. That he didn't have it. No charisma, no presence, not even the look. That man was Harrison Ford. Today, his name is known around the globe. He's Han Solo, Indiana Jones, the embodiment of cinematic adventure. But before the fame, before the blockbuster roles and magazine covers, Harrison Ford was just another guy trying to survive in a town that chews people up and spits them out without a second thought. And for a long time, that's all he did. Survive. He was born on July 13th, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois. His mother was a former radio actress, and his father a former actor turned advertising executive. You could say show business ran in his blood, but that didn't mean the world was going to hand him a script. Harrison wasn't a star student. He wasn't the loudest in the room or the most confident. In fact, he described himself as a shy kid, someone who stayed in the background. He went to college at Ripon College in Wisconsin, majoring in philosophy, but it wasn't books that stirred something in him. It was drama class. He signed up because it was an easy credit. But something strange happened. The boy who barely spoke up in class suddenly found power in performance. He found himself. So he made the bold choice. He packed up his bags and headed west to California, hoping to find a future in acting. No connections, no fame, just a dream. Sounds like the beginning of every Hollywood success story, right? But here's the twist. Nobody cared. He got a contract with Columbia Pictures' New Talent program in 1964, and you'd think that would be the golden ticket. But it wasn't. The roles they gave him, background, characters, bit parts. He was cast as a bellboy, a delivery guy, a face in the crowd. No lines, no development, no growth. He was just there. He was told, and this is real, that he would never be a star because he didn't have what it takes. One executive at Columbia told him bluntly, "You'll never make it in this town." Can you imagine hearing that? Can you imagine chasing your dream with every ounce of courage, only to be told you were wasting your time? Most people would give up, walk away, go home. But not Harrison. He kept grinding, taking what little roles he could, waiting for his moment. But Hollywood wasn't waiting for him. The contracts dried up, the calls stopped. He had a wife, 2 young boys, and bills that didn't care about his dreams. So what did he do? He picked up a hammer. He became a self-taught carpenter. Not because he gave up on acting, but because he refused to let his family starve while he waited for a break. He didn't sit around hoping someone would rescue him. He went to work. He learned everything he could about carpentry, built cabinets, furniture, even worked on studio lots. He was literally building the dreams of others, while his own remained buried beneath nails and sawdust. But here's the thing about life. Sometimes the detour is the path. Because that carpentry job, that side hustle just to pay the bills, it ended up putting him in the right place at the right time, working on carpentry gigs. He came into contact with producers, directors, and other creatives. Not as an actor, as a worker, no spotlight, no applause. Just a man with a tool belt and a dream he refused to let die. And that dream, it stayed alive in him, no matter how dim things got. Every rejection was fuel. Every no was a reason to keep building. Not just cabinets, but character. Every day he walked into a house to build someone else's kitchen. He carried with him the quiet hope that his day would come. There is a beautiful irony in it all. The very hands that couldn't hold a Hollywood script were busy building shelves, doors, tables, creating structure when life felt chaotic. There's something sacred about hard work, about staying humble when life gives you no validation. And in those quiet hours, Harrison Ford became something that even the most gifted actor cannot fake. Real. Genuine. Solid. He wasn't pretending to struggle. He was struggling. He wasn't rehearsing pain. He was living it. He once said, "I realized early on that success was not going to be handed to me. I would have to earn it. And that meant doing whatever it took." And he did. He built his survival with wood, nails, and willpower. Let's pause for a second here. How many of us are in that place right now? Working jobs that feel like detours, doing things that weren't in the plan, feeling invisible, overlooked, told we're not good enough. But what if, like Harrison Ford, this detour is shaping you into the person who can handle what's coming? What if it's not the end, but the beginning? Maybe you're clocking in at a job that feels beneath your dreams. Maybe you're facing rejection after rejection. Maybe people around you just don't see the fire burning inside of you, but you see it, you feel it. Harrison Ford's early life wasn't glamorous. It wasn't fast-paced it was quiet, humble, frustrating, sometimes heartbreaking, but it was real. And in that realness, the hammer swinging, the long days, the missed opportunities, he was building more than furniture. He was building resilience. He was building integrity. He was building a man who, when the call finally came, would be ready. They told him he didn't have what it took. But they were wrong, because what it takes isn't a pretty face or perfect timing. What it takes is showing up when no one's watching. What it takes is refusing to give up, even when the world turns its back. What it takes, is believing in yourself when no one else does. You Dante become Harrison Ford, the legend, without first being Harrison Ford. And that's the truth. They don't put on posters. Before the lights, before the cameras, before the iconic roles, there was a man in a workshop, with calloused hands, and a dream that hadn't died. Sometimes, the thing that changes your life forever doesn't come with flashing lights or a grand announcement. It shows up quietly, dressed like hard work, disguised as something ordinary. That's how it was for Harrison Ford. He didn't step onto a movie set and instantly become a star. No, he stepped into houses with a toolbox, with calloused hands and sweat on his brow. He wasn't rehearsing lines, he was installing cabinet. And yet, every nail he drove in, every board he measured, was one step closer to something unimaginable. Harrison Ford became a carpenter, not because he gave up on acting, but because life demanded more from him than his dream could offer at that moment. But here's the twist. That side job, that humble trade, it brought him face to face with the very people who would one day change everything. One of his clients was none other than Fred Roos, a casting director working closely with filmmaker George Lucas. Harrison wasn't pitching himself. He was just doing his job, building a door, fixing a frame, but doing it well. He left impressions not with flashy charisma, but with humility and focus. Roos took notice. Now think about that for a second. Sometimes your character speaks louder than your talent. Sometimes, showing up with excellence, even in the smallest task, is what people remember most. Fred Roos remembered. He recommended Ford to Lucas, not because he was the loudest guy in the room, but because he was dependable, real, grounded. That led to Ford landing a small but memorable role in American Graffiti, George Lucas's 1973 coming-of-age film. He played Bob Falfa, a brash, leather jacket-wearing street racer with attitude. It wasn't a lead role, but Ford gave it everything he had. His presence was undeniable. For the first time in years, he wasn't just blending into the background, he was standing out. And just like that, something shifted. The seed was planted, but nothing bloomed immediately. There were no overnight miracles. Ford went right back to carpentry after American Graffiti. No flood of movie offers. No instant fame. Just more wood, more nails, more waiting. Years passed, and then destiny came knocking. In 1975, George Lucas began the search for actors to play the core characters of a new space fantasy film. A risky, unconventional idea called Star Wars. Nobody knew then that it would become a global phenomenon. To the industry, it sounded like a strange, nerdy gamble. But Lucas had a vision. He needed actors who could make that vision real. Here's where the story gets even wilder. At the time, Ford wasn't even being considered for a part. He was helping out behind the scenes, doing carpentry work at American Zoetrope, the production company. Lucas asked him to read lines with other actors he was reading lines so the real candidates could shine. But here's the thing. As Ford kept showing up for those line readings, something started to happen. His delivery, sharp, grounded, no nonsense, brought something fresh to the character of Han Solo. While other actors tried to play the role like a caricature, Ford made it real. He brought attitude without trying too hard, humor without forcing it. A little edge, a lot of heart. He wasn't performing. He was being, and people in the room noticed, including George Lucas. At first, Lucas resisted. He didn't want to repeat himself by casting someone from American Graffiti. He wanted new faces, but he couldn't ignore what was happening. Eventually, he gave in. Harrison Ford was offered the role of Han Solo, not because he pushed his way in, not because he begged for it, but because, in simply showing up and doing his best, even in a job that wasn't meant to be his moment, he became undeniable. Let that sink in. He wasn't even supposed to be in the room, but his presence, his authenticity, his quiet force, it changed everything. He went from a carpenter reading lines on the side, to the most iconic smuggler in cinematic history. The odds of that happening, astronomical. And yet it did. Now imagine Harrison Ford stepping onto the set of Star Wars in 1976. A modest budget, weird costumes. It didn't feel like the beginning of an empire. It felt like a gamble. Many thought the movie would flop. Nobody, not even the cast, really understood what they were part of. But when the cameras rolled, something clicked. Ford brought Han Solo to life in a way no one else could. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was reluctant, sarcastic, independent, and real. People connected with him, not because he was perfect, but because he was relatable. He brought swagger, sure, but also vulnerability. Lines like, "Never tell me the odds weren't just scripted." They became legendary because he made them real. You could feel the weight of someone who had fought for everything he had, and wasn't afraid to go it alone. When Star Wars hit theaters in 1977, everything changed. The movie exploded into a cultural phenomenon. It became one of the most successful films of all time. Suddenly, Harrison Ford, the guy who once couldn't get past bit parts, who built decks and bookcases just to get by, was a global star. But here's the deeper truth. The world finally saw what had always been there. That strength, that grit, that presence. It had been there in the shadows, during the rejections. It had been there when he was swinging hammers and hanging doors. It had been there when he read lines not meant for him and still gave them life. And when the opportunity came, he was ready. That's the power of preparation meeting purpose. Ford's rise wasn't luck. It wasn't timing. It was the natural reward of perseverance, authenticity, and doing the work long before the world was watching. He once said, "You have to have the darkness for the dawn to come." And he lived that truth. This isn't just a Hollywood story. It's a human story. How many of us feel like we're in that waiting period? How many of us are showing up every day, doing what feels like meaningless work, wondering if anyone will ever see our worth? The truth is, your effort is never wasted. Even when it feels like no one's watching, the way you carry yourself, the integrity you bring, the passion you pour in. Sometimes it's not about pushing your way into the spotlight. Sometimes it's about becoming the kind of person the spotlight can't ignore. When Harrison Ford stepped into that casting room, he didn't plan on changing his life. He didn't even think he was being considered. But he showed up as his full self. And that made all the difference. Because when you are honest, when you are grounded, when you are ready, you don't need to beg for a break. The break comes to you. By the time the credits rolled on the first Star Wars, Harrison Ford was no longer just a carpenter. But if you think that's where the story ends, that once he got his big break, it was smooth sailing, you'd be wrong. Because greatness doesn't come from one moment. It comes from what you do next. After the galaxy knew his name, after Han Solo became a household icon, Harrison Ford stood at a crossroads that every rising star eventually faces. Would he be a one-hit wonder, or something more? He chose more. And it began with a hat, a whip, and a call from Steven Spielberg. In 1981, Ford took on the role of Indiana Jones in Raiders of the Lost Ark, a daring archaeologist with a mind as sharp as his punch. Indiana Jones wasn't just a character, he was an adventure brought to life, and Ford didn't just play him, he became him. He was a man who had already given the world one unforgettable hero, and now he was crafting another. Indiana Jones was fearless, flawed, and full of fire, and so was Ford. Through the jungles, deserts, temples, and traps, he gave the world a hero who wasn't invincible, but who never gave up, who stumbled, bled, got back up, and kept going. Sound familiar? That's because it was Ford's own story, told in a fedora. Indiana Jones became another global success, and with every film, Ford proved that his career wasn't a fluke. It was the result of passion, grit, and relentless belief. And he didn't stop there. In 1982, he gave us another unforgettable performance in Blade Runner. Dark, complex, and unlike anything audiences had seen before, the role of Rick Deckard showed a different side of Ford, introspective, haunted, and deeply human. It wasn't the easiest film to make. In fact, the production was riddled with creative conflict, and when it released, it was met with mixed reviews. But Ford didn't fold. He stood by the work, believing in the story, in the message, and in the long game. And over time, Blade Runner became a cult classic, a film ahead of its time. Another example of how sometimes greatness isn't recognized immediately. Sometimes the seeds you plant today won't bloom until years later, and that's okay. Ford kept going. The Fugitive in 1993, Air Force One in 1997, dozens of roles, each crafted with care. He didn't rest on fame, he kept evolving. But here's something people don't talk about enough. The failures, because yes, even at the top, Ford faced setbacks. Not every movie was a hit. Not every choice worked. He faced critical flops, commercial disappointments, even injuries on set. There were years when people questioned whether he still had it, whether he'd gone too far, stayed too long, and through it all, he never stopped. He didn't let the noise define him. He let the work speak. There were also personal challenges. Relationships strained. Injuries sustained. He crashed a plane in 2015 and walked away with serious injuries. But again, he got back up. That's what he's always done. And isn't that what resilience really is? Not perfection, persistence, not a smooth path, but the courage to keep walking it anyway. Harrison Ford didn't become a legend because he never failed. He became a legend because he refused to quit. The characters he played, Han Solo, Indiana Jones, Rick Deckard, they were flawed, scrappy, human. And that's why we loved them. Because deep down, we saw ourselves in them. And in Harrison Ford's journey, we see what's possible when you believe in yourself, even when no one else does. His story tells us that you can start from nowhere, be rejected, ridiculed, overlooked, and still rise. That you can take the long road, with twists and setbacks, and still arrive at greatness. He didn't follow the rules. He followed the work. He trusted the grind. He built a legacy not by pretending to be something he wasn't, but by embracing exactly who he was. And that's the lesson. You don't have to be perfect. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need permission from the world to chase your dream. What you need is honesty. What you need is heart. What you need is hunger. The kind that doesn't quit when things get hard. Ford once said, "We all have big changes in our lives that are more or less a second chance." Let that hit, because maybe right now, you're standing at the edge of your second chance. Or your third. Or your 10th. And maybe you're wondering if it's too late, if you're too broken, too far behind, or just not enough. But look at Harrison Ford, a man who was told he'd never make it, who was pushed aside, counted out, underestimated for years, and yet, he kept showing up, kept working, kept building, until one day, the world caught up to his belief, and it changed everything. So here's the message. You don't have to be the chosen one. You don't have to be the prodigy or the star student. You just have to stay in the game, show up, trust the journey, let the world say what it wants, let the rejections pile up, let the doubts whisper in your ear, but never, ever let them have the final word. You do. You get to decide whether today is the end or the beginning. You get to decide whether you'll shrink in defeat or rise in defiance. And maybe you're not standing on a movie set or reading lines in a casting room. Maybe your stage is smaller. Your audience is just yourself in the mirror. That's okay. Your story matters just as much. Every choice you make, to keep going, to keep trying, to believe just one more time. That's how legends are born. Not with fame, but with fire. So what will you build? What will you chase? What will you refuse to give up on? Harrison Ford became a symbol of courage, not because he had an easy path, but because he walked the hard one with dignity. And now, it's your turn. Take that dream, that calling, that flicker of hope you've been carrying, and protect it, fight for it, because one day, you'll look back like Harrison Ford does now, and realize that every setback was a setup for something greater. And when your moment comes, you won't need luck. You'll just need to be ready. So start building, start believing, and never forget, you are stronger than you think. This channel is your daily dose of motivation, resilience, and real-life inspiration. From legends who were told they'd never make it, to everyday warriors chasing their dreams, we share powerful journeys that remind you, setbacks are setups for comebacks. If you're tired of the noise and ready to fuel your fire, you're in the right place. Subscribe for emotionally gripping, soul-stirring content that will push you to believe in yourself, rise above rejection, and take action, because your victory is already in motion. Let's vibe, let's rise, let's win, together.